Hey guys, in today's video, I want to teach you how to create this really nice reusable notification component. So I'll just show an action first. So here, I just say hello world, and whatever we put in here is actually going to be dispatched as a notification. So let's say I dispatch a success one, you can see it shows up on the side here. You can see there is a loader here, so this just shows when it's going to expire. And when we hover over it, it actually pauses. And when it actually finally expires, the notification leaves. We can have multiple notifications, and we can also have multiple notification types. So you can see here, this is an error one. And we can also click the X button at the top to remove it ourselves. The purpose of this notification component is mainly to improve the user experience. So a lot of the times I find myself in a situation where an API request goes through successfully, and I want to let the user know that it went through, just so that they have that information. And the problem with that is, a lot of the times what I would do is just something like put the success message here saying your request went through successfully or whatever. And the problem with that is we have to do that everywhere. So everywhere where we make that request, we have to do this. And you probably also want to hide it at some stage. So you'd have to set a timeout and then maybe change the state. It's actually fine, but the problem is it's a lot of work and it's not really sustainable. You can't keep reusing it. You have to create it from scratch every single time. With this, you actually just, once we're done with actually creating the component, and we're going to be using the context API to create this, the way that it works is at the end is just that we dispatch from our own custom hook, and that's it. We just dispatch, let's say the type here is success, type here is error, and then the message, and that's pretty much it. Everything else, like this timer here, gets taken care of for us by the component that we create. So let's get started and actually code this. Okay, so to get started, you want to open up your terminal. So I'm just using my IDE's integrated terminal. You want to type npx create react app. I just specify whatever directory you want. So // just specifies the current directory that I'm in. I've already run this, so I already have the basic create react app boilerplate here. You also want to type npm install UUID. So this is the only package we're going to be using. This just generates unique IDs as strings, and we need these for when we map over something. We want to have a unique key, and I'll actually show you guys what happens if we don't have a unique key or if you use the index. This does cause some issues. So once we have those two, let's just type npm run start. So this will just start a local development server on port localhost 3000. So let's minimize this now. Let's open up our folders and let's go to the source directory, and we want to go to the app.js file. So there's some boilerplate JSX here. We're just going to remove that. I'm also going to remove all the styling in here. And let's just say test. And yeah, so everything's showing up here. Let's also just remove this logo here. All right, so to get started, I want to create a component that's going to wrap our entire app. So let's create a new directory and call this notifications. And in here, let's create a file called notification context.js. Actually, let's call this notification provider. So let's import React from React. I'm not going to deal with the context just yet. So normally you'd actually create your context. I'm going to leave that till a bit later so I can explain it while we're actually adding in the functionality. Otherwise it would just seem a bit abstract, and I want this to be a bit more applied. So for now, I'm not going to deal with any context. Let's instead just create a normal component. So a notification provider. And I'm calling this notification provider because it is going to provide the context to the rest of the app. Although once again, we are not doing that just yet. Let's just return a div. And then let's just, in here, do props. So let's grab our props. And then we just want to do props.children. And then here, let's create some, it's actually not going to be state. So for now, I'm just going to create a variable called notifications. And this is just going to act as our temporary static state until we actually create some state, which is going to be handled with the context. The only reason that I'm not doing it yet is because we're not actually going to be using useState, we're going to be using useReducer. And I want to explain that in detail when we actually go through it. but for now, just this is good enough. So I want to be able to dispatch an object, and that object is going to have a structure that looks something like this. So it's going to have an ID. So let's import v4 from UUID. And when we call v4 like this, it just generates a random string. So if I console log notifications, then I go here, we have to actually call this somewhere. So let's go to our index.js. Let's wrap this. Oh, and we have to also export this. So let's export default notification provider. Then in our index.js, we just call the notification provider, and we want to wrap the entire app with this. So you want this to be as high up as possible. So now we have our app here. So let's actually check the console. You can see we have our array, and inside here, the object, and the ID is just a UUID. So it's a unique string. And we're going to use this when we map over our state. I also want to give this a type. So it's either going to be success or error. So success or error, one of these two. So I'll just leave this on a success, and a message. So all of this stuff, so apart from the ID, which I do recommend you all stick to, the type, the message, this is all up to you. So you could even create more types like info or something like that, and then create CSS rules for those, so they're styled differently. You could have maybe, let's say, a title here. So let's say with every success, you might want to have a title saying successful, and you want to show that on the UI. I'm going to keep mine quite basic and let you guys decide what sort of things you want to add. So yeah, let's just say hello world. And so this is going to be our basic structure for when we dispatch notification. It's going to look like this, where this and this can be, so this can either be success or error, and this can be whatever you want. Maybe something from an API, for example. So now what I actually want to do is create another component called notification. And so this is actually going to be that box that we're going to see here on the side. So let's import React. Let's say notification is a functional component. We're going to return a div. Let's give this a class name of notification item. Let's export this as default. And let's just do the styling for this. So I want, so it's going to be notification item. I want a paragraph tag with, let's just say, the props. So let's grab the props, so props.message. So the way we're going to get this message is from here. So this is what this message is going to be. And let's also create a div. And this is going to be, let's give this a class name of bar. So this is going to be that expiration bar that we're going to see at the bottom. And when this runs out, it's going to actually remove the notification. So we'll deal with the logic in a moment. For now, let's map through this. So let's actually wrap this in a div as well. Let's say notification wrapper. And this is because this is actually going to be position fixed, because I always want this to be at the top right of the screen, no matter how far down they've scrolled. And so let's say notifications.map. And here we get the notification. Let's say note. And I want to return a notification component. What I'm going to do is just spread in all of the information here. So when you spread something in like this, then all of these properties will be accessible to you here through props. So props.message would actually be this. So that's what this does. And let's also say key. So because we're mapping over something, is equal to note.id. So the ID is unique because v4 always generates unique IDs. So yeah, we can be confident that it's going to be unique. So that should render 1. So here we have this. If I look at the elements for this, we have our notification wrapper and our single notification item. So let's do some styling around this. I will actually also attach, I'll put a link to the GitHub repository where you can just copy and paste all the styles. So if you want to skip the styling part of this video, that's fine. Just remember to actually copy all of the styles so everything looks nice for you. So let's say notification wrapper, position fixed. I want this to be at the top right, and let's say a 10 pixels away from the top and 10 pixels away from the right. And let's give this a width of 300 pixels. I just spelled notification wrong. So notification. And yeah, so now you can see it's at the top right with 10 pixels at the top and 10 pixels on the right. All right, cool. So now let's do notification item. And I just want this to have a border. Actually, I don't think this needs a border. Let's give it a box shadow, 0 pixel, 0 pixel, and then let's give it a blur of 5 pixels with a black color and an opacity of, let's say 40%. All right, and then let's say border radius. Let's just do 10 pixels. That looks right. Let's give this a padding of 5 pixels. And that seems to be a bit too much. Let's also just do, let's just remove the padding from here. Actually, let's do it like this. So any paragraph tags inside here will only have a margin of 0, and let's say a padding of 0 on the vertical axis, and then horizontally just 10 pixels. Actually, let's do it the other way around, sorry. So 10 pixels on the vertical axis and 0 horizontally, and 10 is probably too much. All right, and then let's actually now also do the bar at the bottom. So notification item bar dot bar. Let's give this a height of 10 pixels. And for now, I'm just going to give this a background color of, let's say, tomato. And it looks like that, which is cool. We actually can't have this padding here, which is fine because we have a padding on this. So let's change this back to look like this. You can see that the actual bar is overlapping the div, is coming out of it. So what we can do is say on the item, we just do overflow hidden. All right, cool. So now we have this. Let's actually add in a little bit more padding here. So let's do 10 pixels. Yeah, that looks a bit nicer. So this is display block. So that's why by default it has a width of 100%. We're going to change that in the JavaScript. So we're not going to actually do that here. But what I do want to do is a couple of things. So let's say dot bar. So if the notification item is success, we will actually add a class to this. So let's do that in the JavaScript. So let's change this to backticks. Let's do props dot, I think we called it type, is equal to success. Then we just want to put success, otherwise error. So we can use this to put different styles. You could also do other checks. If let's say you had a different type like info, you could add an info class name here and then add some styling specific to that. So now here, dot success. So if it's success, we want the bar to be, let's say, let's give a green color. And if it's an error, we want this to be red. So now it's success here. If I go to here, the notification provider changes to error, then it will be red. And we'll also do some other styling as well. But just for now, I just wanted to change the color of the bar. And one more thing I want to do. So let's say we add in a second one. Then I want there to be a little bit of spacing here. So let's do a margin bottom of 10 pixels. I think, yeah, that's maybe a little bit more. So let's do 20 pixels. And then let's also increase this box shadow to about 10 pixels. And let's lower the opacity to 30%. All right, I think that looks all right. Just going to change the color of this green. All right, so I think that looks good. Okay, so now what I want to do is add the ability to actually fill this. So the way that we're going to do this, so if we go to our notification, I'm going to create a constant called width and set width. I'm going to create some state for this. So let's make sure to import use state, where by default, this is going to be 0. Then I'm going to apply some styles here and say width, using backticks here, I'm going to say is width %. So now if we look at this, it's actually 0. If I change this to 50, it's 50%. So what we're going to do is update the state here of width, and it will also update this. So let's create two functions. So one to start this process of filling in the width, and one to pause it or at least stop it. So let's say handle start expire, handle start timer. And what I want to do with this is a set interval. The way that set interval works is that it accepts a callback and then accepts how often it should run. So if I set this to 20 milliseconds, so every 20 milliseconds this will run. Now we need to be able to stop this. So the way that we can do this is that set timer actually returns sort of like a timeout ID, interval ID, where what we can do is we can clear this set interval using this interval ID that we get back. So let's just call this ID. And we want to keep track of what this ID is, because every time we start it, we actually get a new interval ID. So let's create some state to handle the interval ID. And let's say use state, where initially this is just going to be null because we don't want to accidentally change an interval somewhere else. So what it's going to do, so as soon as we start the timer, I'm going to set interval ID to ID. Actually, this should interval. So once again, going through this one more time, this handle timer start will start a set timeout, where this function, which we'll do the logic for in a moment, will run every 20 milliseconds, and it will also set the state. So the first time when this runs, so remember this part here is actually outside of the set interval. We're going to set this interval ID to the ID that is returned by the set interval. And the purpose of that is so we can create a handle stop timer, or maybe let's call this pause timer, where what we're going to do is clear interval using the interval ID. So we're going to clear it with this ID. Now what we can do is when the component of first mounts, React.use effect. So if we put an empty array of dependencies, this will only run when the component first mounts. We're just going to call handle start timer. Oh, this is the pause, handle start timer. And all we're actually going to do in here is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to do set width, and this is going to be a callback. So remember, when you're updating some state, if you put a callback here, the parameter that you get here is actually your previous state, which I often just call prev because it's simpler. And so if prev is less than 100, so if it's less than 100%, then I just want to return prev plus 0.5. So every 20 milliseconds, we're going to add 0.5% onto the width of this bar. So I hope that makes sense. And in case we're actually at 100, so once this gets to 100, then what we actually want to do is instead return prev. We don't actually want to increment past 100. And you might be wondering why I don't put else here. It's because we're returning here. So when this if statement runs, it returns out of this callback until the next one's called where all of this runs again. So I hope that makes sense. I know it's a bit confusing. So now you can see that this is running, and you can see the width here is being updated by 0.5 every 20 milliseconds. In case you guys are wondering, because the total width is 100, we have to do 200 iterations of this. So we have to do 200 iterations of this before we get to 100% width. So because we're doing 200 iterations, multiplied by 20 would mean that this is actually going to take 4 seconds. So 400 milliseconds, which is 4 seconds. So yeah, in case you want to maybe change this timeout to be something else, I think if you set this to 15, this should be 3 seconds, but I'm just going to leave it for 4 seconds. So you can tinker with that, or maybe you could even accept it as a prop where you change this. So yeah, that's up to you guys, however you want to handle that. I think this error that we're getting here is because clear interval expects a integer, and it's possible that we could pass null. But that wouldn't actually happen, because as soon as the component mounts, we're going to start that timer. Okay, so now let's add the ability so that when we hover over this, it actually stops the timer. So right now when we hover over it, nothing happens. So to do that, we're just going to say on mouse enter. So when the mouse enters this, I'm going to call handle pause timer. So when I enter this, it's going to stop it, same with this one. But now when I leave it, we need to handle that as well. So let's do on mouse leave. So this, I should explain this in more detail. On mouse enter only runs once when your mouse first goes into that component. It doesn't run again. Then when your mouse leaves that component, this here, so handle start timer will run. So when we enter, we pause it, and when we leave, we start it up again. So I hope that makes sense. And now if I hover over this, it stops. And yeah, it's working perfectly. And you can see they're both independent of one another because they're their own components. So that is quite nice. So now that we have the ability to pause this, let's actually look at creating the ability to dispatch actions. And actually just one more thing, let's actually do some animation stuff. So when this component first mounts, when a new notification comes, I want it to slide in from the right to the left. So the way that I'm going to do this, I'm going to create some keyframes called slide left. So it's going to slide to the left. So say at 0%. I'm just going to give this a margin left of 120%. The reason I'm doing 120 is because if we did 100, this little space here, so this I think 20 pixel or this 10 pixel gap, actually would mean that a slight portion of this would be in view when it first mounts. That's why I'm just doing 120 just to make sure that extra 20 pixels is taken care of. And then at 100%, I want the margin left to be 0. And then what we can do is we can say animate. We can pass the name of this as slide left. And then let's just do 0.3 seconds, or actually maybe even a bit faster, 0.2 seconds. And then we can do animate fill mode, and we do forward. The reason for this is, so once this is done, it actually keeps this margin left 0. So now if I refresh this, you can see it quickly comes in. Let's maybe change this to 0.4. So I also realized this issue where you can see that as soon as the component mounts, because this has a small width, it's actually not, the hello world is breaking. So it's making the component bigger. An easy way to solve that is just to give this a width of 300 pixels. So this way it's the same as your notification wrapper. So now when I refresh this, you can see it actually slides in from the right quite nicely. And then I'm also going to create one more keyframe, which is going to be slide right. So this is when we exit, where it's going to be the opposite. And then I'm only going to apply this on. So we're going to add another class to this list here. So if I just format this, So to our class names here, we're gonna add one more, which is gonna be conditional. And it's gonna be, let's create some state. So exit and set exit is equal to use state, and by default, this will be false. So the purpose of exit will be that when this timer finishes, so once we reach 100% width, then I want to set exit to true. I want to, and because exit is true, what we can do is say exit, then we just add the class exit. Otherwise, we add no class. And the reason I'm adding exit instead of just not rendering anything is because if we just remove it, then no animation will work. And I think this will be a bit clearer to you once we add in the context. So for now, all I want you guys to know is that we do need a little bit of a timeout between when we call exit and when we remove this from the actual DOM. And this will be a bit clearer to you guys in a moment. So yeah, so if it's exit, then I want to do the exact same thing as this, except slide right. I think a good way to show this off would probably be just temporarily adding in a button, exit. So we're going to remove this button. I just want to show you guys how it works. Set exit to true. So we click this, it goes away. But if we look at the JavaScript, you can see it's actually here. This is just the margin left of 120%. So you can see it's actually where the console is, so it's off the screen. So let me just remove this. Okay, so that is what exit is. And then once that 300 milliseconds has passed, or however long this is, so this is 400 milliseconds, then we're going to remove it from the DOM. And we're going to do that in our context, in our state. So that's, I think that should be almost it for this. Oh, let's do one more thing. Let's create a function, close notification. So this function, the purpose of it is to do exactly what we just said about the set state. So what I want to do is set exit to true. Then I want to do a set timeout, where the way that this works is this function here. So this anonymous function here will run after this period of time. So this is in milliseconds. So it's 400. So after 400 milliseconds, this function here will run. And in this function, we can't actually add it yet. Remove it from state and therefore the DOM. So just don't worry about that for now. When we close it, one other thing I want to do is stop the timer. So I'm going to also call handle pause timer, just to clear the interval so we don't have that interval left over. One final thing we have to do is we have to actually detect once this width is 100 and call this handle close notification. So let's do a react.use effect, where what I want this to do is every time the width is updated, I want to check if the width is equal to 100, then close notification. And to do this, we're just going to call handle close notification. So I know I've gone through quite a bit here. So I'm going to go over everything. So let's start off with the width. The width is just going to be between 0 and 100. It's going to, we only use it to set the width of the bar. And we update this using handle start timer, which runs as soon as the component mounts. And this also runs when we leave the this input here, when we leave this div here. Oh, and as you guys could just see there, because the width was equal to 100, we were actually closing the notification. So that just shows that was working nicely. But yeah, anyway, back to this. So that's how the handle start timer works. When the handle start timer runs. The way that it actually works is we have an ID here, and this is returned to us by set interval. And the reason we have to capture this ID is because we need to actually stop this interval at certain times, such as when we hover over it. And inside here, all we're doing, so this function here gets called every 20 milliseconds, where we're just going to set the width. We're going to grab the previous width. You might be thinking about doing this. So to instead of doing this, you might be thinking, oh, I could just do if I could do set width plus 1, but that actually wouldn't work. You'll actually notice every time I hover it over it, it works once, because what we're doing is recalling this entire function. The reason that this doesn't work is because the width here is actually the width that you had from the start. It's actually not the most up-to-date width because of the scope of this function. It actually takes this width when it was first called. Might sound a bit confusing, but all you need to know is that this width that you're getting here is not accurate. So instead, you want to use set width, and you want to use the previous width that you get. And we just do a simple check. As long as it's less than 100%, we just increment by 0.5%. And if it is greater than or equal to 100%, then we just return it. And actually, one more thing we should probably also do is, instead of just returning it, we should clear interval ID. So we should just, in case this does reach 100, then we should also clear it. Because before what it was actually doing is it was still looping. Even once it got to 100%, it was constantly setting state back to 100, 100, 100 over and over again. So this just removes that. So we're capturing that interval ID and this interval state here using set interval ID. So that is what the handle start timer does. Handle pause timer, all this does is just clear the interval of that ID. That's literally all that does. Handle close notification, so this stops the timer. This sets close to true, so this state that we have here is going to set it to true, which will then add this exit class to our div, to our notification item div, so our wrapper one, which will just add in this animation to slide out to the right. It doesn't remove it from the DOM, it's still there, it's just off the screen. We'll handle that next, but this is just for the animation. And then this after 400 milliseconds, so after the animation is done, we're going to actually remove it from the state, and when we remove it from the state, that'll also remove it from the DOM. So let's work on that next. So coming back to our notification provider where we map through this, let's now actually change this to be state and dispatch, and we're going to be using the use reducer hook. So make sure to import this from React. So the way that use reducer works is we get the state and the action in this callback, in this anonymous function. And then the second argument is actually your initial state. So I'm just going to, for now, set this to be that, what we created earlier. So let me just also change this to state. So this is now our initial state. And then we have this dispatch. So this is somewhat similar to set state, but it's also slightly different. And then here we have state and action. So let me explain what this is. Dispatch, the way that this is actually something that we call. So we dispatch, and then what we put in here, so let's say I put an object with type success, then what would happen is, or actually let's say add notification. This object right here would actually be put into action. So what would happen in here is action would actually be equal to this. And this callback would actually run. So when we call dispatch, this callback runs. It puts this action here, so this object here, into action. And state is just what your previous state was. That's all that is. And what we have to do, and let me just keep this here just so you guys can use it as reference. So what we have to do in the reducer, in the anonymous function, is whatever we return gets put into state. So similar to how if we had state, let's say other state and set other state. So similar to how if we do set other state and call the callback, then whatever we return from here gets put into state. It's actually very similar, except now we also have action. A common way that you would see people handle this, and it is also common convention to call this state and this action, but of course you can call these whatever you want. So the common convention for this is actually to dispatch something with a type, which is often a all capitalized string, And then you would do different things to your state. So you'd perform different sort of logic on your state depending on the action type. So this might all sound a bit confusing, but I think as we go through this, it will make more sense. So action, so a switch statement based off the action dot type. So let's just handle the default, where by default I just want to return state. Let's handle the case where it's add a notification. For now I'm just going to return state, and another case where we remove notification. And I'm also just going to return state here for now. So if we dispatch something with add notification, then what I want to do is just add that to the state. So easiest way we could do that is return array, where we spread in the state. And the reason why this is an array is because our state here is actually an array, and this is just the initial state. And I'm just going to append the action dot payload, and this is going to be an object which I'm going to spread in. So you might be wondering where this action dot payload is coming from. So we'd have to actually update this to give it a payload. And remember, wherever we return from this gets put into our state. So I want this payload to have the exact same structure as this. So it would have an ID of v4. It would have a type. For now, I'm just going to hardcode this as success. And a message, which I'm also going to hardcode as new notification. So this payload here, all I'm doing is I'm just copying it and putting it into our state. That's all I'm doing here. So this is all add notification is going to do. So now actually, I think it might be a good idea to do this remove notification. So the way that we would do this is we're going to pass down dispatch. So we're passing down this dispatch function into our notification component. And when we do that, it means we can call any of these. We can dispatch an action directly to this state that we have here. So this is where we're going to actually remove state and therefore remove it from the DOM. So we're going to do props.dispatch, and I'm going to dispatch a type of remove notification. So let's just copy this, and I'm going to say, I'm just going to give this ID as props.id. So we're going to use this ID here to know which element of the array to remove. And remember, this runs after 400 seconds. So after that animation where this slides out, then we're going to call the remove. So I think a good way to show this is, let's actually do it, and then it will be quite clear. Okay, so what I want to do is remove only the elements in this array which has an ID of the one that we pass here, so this prop. So the way we can do that is state.filter. So this is a method on arrays where we get the element, so it loops through all your elements. And if you return true, it will actually keep it in the array. And if you return false, it will remove it. If l.id, so these are all of the elements in the array, is equal to action.id. So remember, action is this. And I'm saying .id, which is this props.id. So if this is equal to this, then keep it. So we actually want the opposite, sorry. So we want to do, if this is not equal to the action ID, so every other ID, so this would be true for all other IDs, then we keep them. But once we get to R1, so let's say this one and it's ABC. If this ABC is not equal to ABC, then, oh wait, that would actually be false. So it would return false. So it would be taken out of the state. And this actually returns an array. So you don't have to worry about, you don't have to do what we do here where we spread it in. This does return an array, so it handles the copy for you. So that is how that works. And I think it should work now if we test it. So if I hover over this one, you can see that's removed, and it's actually also removed from the DOM. Another way to show you would be to wait for the top one to remove. And you can see this one actually goes up to where the other one is because that space is no longer occupied because it's been removed from the DOM. So that's the remove taken care of. Okay, so now we can remove notifications, we have two hard-coded default ones. Let's actually add the ability to create a notification from anywhere. So to do this, we're going to need some context. And the only purpose of our context is actually to expose this dispatch to all of our nested components. So let's just say notification context is equal to use to create context. So this is something you have to import from React, where what you have to put in here is actually your default state, but I'm not gonna do that here. I'm gonna do that somewhere else. So instead of this div, what I now want to put is notification context dot provider, and then here provider you have to pass a value, and so this is actually the value that you're going to pass to all of your nested components. So I'm just going to pass in dispatch. So this might be a bit confusing if you've never used the context API before, so I'll just go through it again. We create a context, and then using that context, which is actually a component, on the dot provided, we pass a value, and this value is now accessible to everything that is nested within all the components that are nested within this notification provider. So this might be a bit difficult to understand. So an easier way I can actually show you guys is if I instead pass the value as a string hello world, then I'll show you guys how we access this. So we import, and we have to actually export something. We have to actually export this context. So the way that we use this, if I go to app and I wanted to use it here, I would say, let's say context value is equal to use context. So this is something we have to import from React. So it's going to use the context, and we have to specify which context we're using. So I want to say the notification context. So remember to import that. And that is just this, the thing that we just exported. And now let me just console log the context value. So here you can see it's hello world. So you can see that whatever value we pass here is actually now available to all the children using their use context. So what I want to do is pass down dispatch. So if I pass that down, you can see this is a function dispatch action, which now is just going into the React code. But yeah, so you can see that we're actually now passing down this dispatch function here. So all we'd have to do to actually dispatch an action, dispatch a new notification, is just this. So if I uncomment this, cut it from here, and just paste it, let's rename this to dispatch, and let's run this. So react.use effect. Let's only run this when the component mounts. So we're going to add new notification, say, hello, I am a new notification. So you can see here, we have hello, I am a new notification, which was instantly run as soon as the component mounted. But let's create an input here. And let's just create some state to handle that input's value. Let's just say value is equal to input value. And let's do on change. Set input value e.target.value. And then let's put a button here, add notification. Where on click, let's handle new notification. I'm just going to dispatch this, so we can remove it here. And let's just call this function. So all I just did there was create some state to handle this inputs data. When we click this add notification button, it's going to call handle new notification, which is just going to call this dispatch with type add notification. So because it's add notification, it's going to run this, where it's just going to append to the end of the array that object with this entire payload. We have the ID, which is unique, the type, which is success, and the notification, hello, I'm a new notification. which the message we should actually change to input val. And let's change this to error as well, just to see how that would look. So if I write test here, add notification, we get a new notification. You can see that it's here. And then once it exits, it runs the remove notification, which just filters it out based on the ID. So now if I just add a bunch, we can, let's say, pause this one, unpause it, and everything works nicely. Now I just want to show you guys one small thing. So here in state, we map through our entire state. So we actually get the notification and we get the index. So I just want to show you guys why we use UUID. If we change the key to instead be just the index, I say test, and I add in a bunch of these, you can see you'll actually run into this error where for some reason here it's not working properly. You can see you're getting a warning from React. And if I add a new notification, you can see there's this weird gap up here. You can see that these all of these items that should have been removed are still there. So this is why the key actually has to be unique. And the thing that's causing this error is that the key is not unique after on each render. So let's say we remove the first index, or actually that 0 index is now the old first index is now new 0 index. So it's not very consistent with the keys. So that's why we always want to have a unique key. A good one is some sort of ID from your database. But in this case, we don't have a database. So we're just using the UUID's ID. So now if I keep adding stuff here, you can see we don't have that issue where there's that weird gap that we had initially. And you can see that the elements are actually being removed as they're supposed to be. Okay, so one more thing that I actually want to do is I don't like how we are dispatching. I don't like the fact that every time I have to import dispatch from the use context, and I also have to import the context. I don't think that it's not a big problem, but it's something that I want to actually try and avoid. So instead, I'm just going to create a hook, a custom hook called use a notification. So there's going to be a function. I'm going to say, actually what we're going to do is pretty much exactly what we did here. I'm going to use this. So down here in our use notification hook, I'm going to get the dispatch using the context for this. I'm actually going to not export this anymore. So I'm just going to remove the export. So we can't export, so we can't import it. And this dispatch, let me remove that for now. So instead here, what I want to do is return dispatch. You could do it like this. So this way now when you use it, all you'd have to do, let's actually export this as well. So export use notification. So now if I call use, so dispatch is equal to use notification. So now you can see that we don't have to import use context and also import the context. So we can skip that step and we can straight away dispatch type add notification. But I actually also want to skip that part as well. So instead what we can do is return a function. So there's a closure where here what we do is dispatch. So let's say props, and then so we're going to dispatch an object with type, and then we can predefine this as add notification. So that this way when we use the use notification, the type is always going to be add notification, and then we can just spread in any additional things. Yeah, so we actually wouldn't put the props there. We do payload and then props. And then the way that we'd use this now is we just say dispatch props. We would just do, let's say, type success and message. Let's just do input val. Oh, and one thing that I forgot is we should also add in ID as v4. Oh, and I just realized we actually wouldn't spread it here. We just leave props by itself, and then we'd spread it here. So I know that was a bit confusing. So here what we're doing is we're getting the dispatch from the use context, from the notification context that we have up here. And in the notification context, we provide the value, which is this dispatch, which is how we're getting dispatch here. So I hope that makes sense. And this can be called whatever you want. I'm just choosing to call it dispatch. We are returning a function, and this lets them pass through props. We're setting some predefined things. So we're saying that by default, the type is add notification. This is so that they can't, so that it's impossible to dispatch remove notification. And the payload, we're adding in the ID v4, and we are also we're just spreading in any of the other props, which should be type and message. So here, when we call it, we just say const dispatch is equal to use notification. You can see we don't use context, so we can remove that. We don't need to do the ID because the hook takes care of it for us. We don't even have to import the context. All we have to do is just import use notification. And this is anywhere within our app, we can import this. We say dispatch, and you call this wherever you want. So I'm calling it here on this button click. You could call it when an API goes through or an API fails. You can change the type here to whatever you want. And this is the part where I was talking about customization. So these props here, let's say you wanted to add a title. So successful request, something like that. Then all you'd have to do is just, let's remove these actually, just these. This is the default state, so it's just an empty array. So all you have to do is that now in note, where you pass down all of note to notification, you could do a check. So something as simple as props.title and say h2 props.title. So now if I say test, we have successful request and then test. Of course, it's not styled, so it's quite ugly. But yeah, that's one thing you could do. You could have more types and apply different styles to the notification item, and therefore change all the styles of the entire component. So I just did that with a very simple example in here, where if it's success, then the bar is green. When it's an error, then the bar is red. And you can see that if I do, so you can see those two are green, and then if I change this to error, you can see now it's red. So this is what I mean when I say this is really customizable. You can change this to whatever you want. You can add features. You could even change the styling to maybe have this at the bottom right, bottom left, top left, wherever you want. So that's pretty much it for this video. Just to go over things one more time, we create some context here. And this context is used here. And we remember to do .provider. So you can provide this value. So this is the value that is going to be passed to your entire React component, React app, or at least not your entire React app, sorry, but everything that's wrapped under it, inside of it. And then here we just have this div, which is just a wrapper and has this position of fixed. We loop through all of our notifications and show this notification component where we pass through all of the data. We created this use notification hook. The purpose of this use notification hook is so that we don't have to always be importing use context and importing the context itself. Instead, we just call use notification, pass in the type, the message, and it's good to go. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know this is probably a bit of a longer one. We went through some fairly complicated stuff. I hope I explained it clearly. If you guys have any questions, just leave it in the comments. I reply to all the comments. So yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.